As I continued working in the factory and the cycle of consuming and thinking looped from day to day, I started to realize I would forget a lot of these ideas I was thinking about or on the information I was listening to, and so I started to find any scrap piece of paper I could find, write the idea or information down, and then put them in my wallet where I knew I would not lose them. Although being on your phone was not seen so kindly by the managers or the supervisors at my work, writing things down on paper was almost ignored, as it was seen as doing something productive, since we needed to fill out paperwork anyway throughout the day. When I would return home from my day at work, I would take these pieces of paper out of my pocket, from my wallet, and place them in a pile and slowly copy them over to either a textbook or onto my computer using Microsoft Word. While at university, I was still using paper to take notes and organize them into folders, though I thought since I was already familiar with this method of organizing notes, why not apply it to just random notes I would jot down during the day, and decided to create a folder with sections by actually going to a shop called W.H. Smith, a bookstore, and purchase the office equipment, mainly folders, dividers, papers, since I had limited supplies left over from my time at university. In this folder, that I still have to this day, is only partially filled with a few notes including the following sections, which are ideas and concepts, physical health, programming, investing and economics, art and drawing. This entire process of thinking, writing down, copying, and organizing took a while to complete, to the point where all of my time and focus was on this information archiving process, and it was driving me crazy, since it was hampering my progress towards actionable items such as house chores and progress on personal projects. While going through my computer, searching online and looking for a better system to use for this process, I found Microsoft Onenote in the list of programs already installed on my computer, and so after loading up the program I instantly became familiar with it, since it replicated the physical folders I had been using at the time. Once on the computer, I quickly found myself making small systems for quickly writing down my handwritten notes and organizing them into sections that evolved over time as my note library grew larger and larger. Since I was digitizing all of my notes anyways, I decided to finally upgrade my smartphone from a Samsung Galaxy S5, which had a short battery life, was slow, and would overheat in my pocket, to an iPhone SE, refurbished, for £200 in cash and pay for a SIM-only contact to save on money in the long term. I chose this iPhone model specifically because it was an iPhone that could be easily repaired with components that were of low price. The screen can be bought for about £15, the battery can be bought for about £20. From a store I bought at the time called Repair Base. Android at the time, the one I owned anyways, was behind compared to the iOS, and so I decided to go for Apple to test it out and see what all the fuss was about. Becoming a new iPhone user in 2018 was not easy. I had no idea about the settings, the types of apps available, or whatever iCloud is, and so I had to look at a few YouTube iOS tutorials to quickly accelerate my understanding of the Apple devices and the Apple ecosystem. After a few weeks, I was happy about the decision, surprisingly. The phone was faster and more responsive than the S5. There were less unreliable apps in the App Store, and some of the native apps for iOS proved to be better in some aspects than some of the many apps I had tried on Android. The best part was iCloud, and the syncing of data to a cloud server to store all my photos, notes and other files, all of which I was doing manually on the Android. They even have a Onenote app that you can set up so I can see and even edit all the files I wrote up on my computer, which made things much easier, especially when reflecting on what I've written or needing to recall a previous idea by referring back to my previous notes. Everything was going great so far in 2018 until I stumbled upon a book called Getting Things Done by David Allen, through a podcast I had just started listening to called Hello Internet. Although the book was written in a time before modern computers, originally published in 2001, I still found the book helpful, and it also reassured me that the methods I had been developing over these last few months were indeed useful and used by others. I was also thankful I was already doing the most important step, which was capturing the information. But the question that remained was, is the current method of capturing the most efficient way, or can it be done differently? In the back of my cupboard I found my grandfather's Kindle that he never used, and decided to try it out and read this book on this instead, to change things up a bit and take notes in the process during my breaks at work. It took a while, almost 2 months in fact, but I got through the book and it indeed did answer my question. The first point to take from this book is not about capturing everything you hear and think about, but to use the capture tool to free your mind from unwanted thoughts, as if tricking the mind that you have remembered the thought by writing it down and then disregarding it later when you no longer need it. And this method helps you to focus thinking about stuff that actually matters to you, instead of worrying all the time about stuff that in the end doesn't really matter. Here's a helpful quote from David Allen: "Your mind is for having ideas, not holding them." The second point to take, which is equally just as important, is to commit the stuff that is important to you into actions that you actually do physically, and not linger in your mind like an annoying fly trapped in a house. To free the fly, you physically have to open the window to let it out. And here's another quote by Henry Bergson: "Think like a man of action. Act like a man of thought." The best takeaway from me was that I no longer needed to permanently store all of the notes I was writing down throughout the day, since the majority of them won't matter to me the next day anyways. So I finally escaped this spiral of thinking and capturing, allowing myself to throw away the notes I did not need without feeling guilt of writing them down and storing them on my computer. To get from thinking to doing, the book made another important highlight. Why not organize the capture notes into 2 categories: actionable notes and non-actionable notes? A simple process, but not one I had yet implemented, and quickly realized I was spending more time writing notes than actually doing the physical things I wanted to do and commit to action in my free time. But then you get into another unorganized situation where you have to create a list of actionable things to do, but not having the time to complete them all. How do you prioritize which actions go first? Which do I delay? Which to-do actions do I disregard, if any? After going through the book again, I looked over the section involving the flow diagram process called the Gtd Method. After capturing and organizing it, splits into 2 sections of actionable and non-actionable notes. Not actionable are either trashed, put into a someday maybe pile, or added into a reference material archive, where useful information can be later retrieved for later projects. So what's the difference between an action and a project? Well, David Allen actually simplifies this in his quote: "You don't actually do a project. You can only do action steps related to it. When enough of the right action steps have been taken, some situations will have been created that match your initial picture of the outcome, closely enough that you can call it done." To put it simply, single actions that can be done within a small time frame, let's just say 2 minutes, can be things like taking out the trash, putting the laundry on, or wiping the table clean. Projects are when a lot of actions are needed to be archived, sometimes in the succession of one another, to complete a certain goal, which normally requires some sort of planning or scheduling. From the things I have learned so far, how did I apply this to my life then? The first thing I did was spend less time capturing notes and more time on committing thoughts into actions. This meant going through the notes I had in the moment into 3 piles: the throwaway pile, the non-actionable pile, and the actionable pile. I put 2 piles into folders and the rest in the bin, and focused on archiving the non-actionable items first into a reference material file, or someday maybe list in my Onenote archive. I then started slowly inserting the to-do actions into reminders on my iPhone by first creating a list called Inbox and then filtering the to-dos over time into more specific lists later on, such as Sunday maybe, next actions this week, schedules after this week, and reoccurring tasks. It is only when my task list becomes so long that I have to scroll down the list of tasks that I decide to find a goal I am working on and put all relevant tasks into that goal and give it a name if it eventually turns into a long-term project. At the beginning, I made the mistake of trying to micromanage my life by atomizing all the tasks I need to accomplish action by action. But over time, what I found to be most effective was starting a list called 3 main tasks, which was the top 3 tasks that I needed to complete by the end of that day, and just try and complete them first. If you are the type of person who finds themselves procrastinating, completing 3 tasks a day can sometimes be challenging enough as it is. There is a chapter of the book that explains how to get started with the Gtd Method. It basically involves spending an entire weekend making a list of all the rooms and places that you have stuff in, and making plans to deal with all that clutter in one single weekend. That means the stuff in your room, your office, the other rooms in your house, the stuff in your parents' house, friend's house, and even any storage unit you may have been renting to store any extra belongings you could not contain within your house. I didn't go all out, but at the very least I spent one weekend listing all the possessions I owned in my parents' house I was living in, which is luckily not much. Most of it fits in my room of 2 meters by 3.3 meters. And then all the actions I'll need to do for the clutter to be trashed and organized. Once I rearranged my life, there was nothing stopping me now from making future plans that I could work on in the long run, and by doing so one action at a time, I could incrementally make personal improvements to my life over time to hopefully be somewhere in 5 years' time I could only dream of getting to someday.